So we've talked about the maxilla in relation to the orbit. We're going to talk now about the jaw and the teeth and how the maxilla and the mandible articulate to form our jaw joint, also known as the temporal mandibular joint. So let's start with maxilla. Again, we have our infraorbital foramen up top. This is that lower margin of the orbit. And we have a couple more processes. People don't think about it, but each of these teeth that you see is going to sit in a little socket called an alveoli, or alveoli, however you want to pronounce it. So these sockets are going to hold our teeth. In between each of these sockets, we typically have a little projection. So imagine the pattern, it's kind of making a swag pattern here. Those little projections are called the alveolar processes. So if you remember alveoli, should be able to remember alveoli process because it's just a little process between the teeth. So that's it for the maxilla. Let's talk about this guy, the mandible. So it's got a lot going on. We're going to start with more foramen. So the mandible has two pairs of foramen. They're called the mental foramen because this is the mental region, the chin region. We also have some alveolar processes. So anywhere we have teeth, we're going to have those alveoli, those depressions, with the alveolar processes between them. So that's all from an anterior view. We have a couple things going on from more of a lateral view. So if we rotate our mandible here, we've got all of this action. So let's break this down. We have the main body of the mandible, and then this is called the angle of the mandible because it's angling, it's changing angle here. And then this entire section is the ramus, the mandibular ramus. So that's the vertical portion of the mandible. It's going to contain another set of foramen, and these are a little trickier to see. So we're actually going to rotate here. Our mandibular foramen are passageways for a couple nerves that you do not need to know, but they are going to be found on the interior surface of the mandible. Okay, back to our lateral view. So we've talked about angle and ramus. Let's talk about some of the things we see on that ramus. So we have two projections here. This outermost one is called our mandibular condyle, and this sits on what is called a condylar process. So this entire thing is condylar process. This rounded tip is a mandibular condyle. More medially, we have the coronoid process. So that is coronoid. We have a lot of similar sounding coro words, so make sure you're not getting that confused with the shoulder girdle. Typically, this is going to be a little medial to our cheekbones, our zygomatic arch. So when they fit together, it's going to sit just medially. It would help if I had it on the right way. There we go. Yep, just medially. Get that out of the way. And then lastly, we have the mandibular notch. So a notch is a deep cutout between the coronoid process and the mandibular condyle.